So, welcome,
Right.
guys, to this mental health check in. These panelists mean a lot to me because I feel like I handpicked them in a way. It's been about a month and a half of really thinking about why we need to check in. So, this mental health check in was created and graciously hosted by NABJ because I can't even imagine having to do both sides. So, I appreciate everyone at NABJ for putting this together technically, like making sure that you can hear us, see us. So, my name is Amber Worthy. I am a journalist in Greenville, South Carolina. I've been here about 2 years, and I've been a member of NABJ off and on for my entire news career. So let's introduce these panelists. We will start in the order that I see it. I hope everybody sees us in this order. We'll start with Kristy.
Hi, I'm Kristy. I'm from SaveOurFamilies nonprofit. I'm also the founder of HipHopDigital Media. Um, I'm just here to share my story and let people know it's really important to check in for your mental health.
Mm.
And Dr. Walker.
Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of day folks may be watching the video. I'm Dr. Rheeda Walker. I'm a professor of psychology. I'm also a clinical psychologist and the author of the Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health that was released in May of last year.
And we're going to circle back to that book that I have right here. It was a part of the motivation. So, Dwayne.
Hey, good afternoon and good morning to everyone. My name is Dwayne James. I'm a licensed marriage social worker, born and raised in Boston, but currently living in Brooklyn, New York. My occupation is a therapist, and I also do a lot of just mental health advocacy and education as well. So that's kind of my little spiel. Thank you for having me. Thank
you. And Charity.
Hi, I'm Charity Bailey, a journalist first turned personality and host of a viral video show called Right This Minute. But I recently created a web series called Girl, We Need to Talk. And it was birthed out of the grieving process when I lost my dad in June of 2018. And so really it's just a space where me and my girlfriends have come together to have open, honest, vulnerable conversations and to create a space for all of you to do this thing. So we cover it all, the grief to therapy, the mental health side of it, domestic violence, suicide awareness, all of the stories from my friends. We gather them, we bring them in the space in hopes that you take something away from it. So it's listed on YouTube. And it's been an interesting space. And so we wanted to create it to take the stigma away from the grieving process.
It was necessary. And that all of your stories kind of came from both Clubhouse and social media, and then finding your series on YouTube. It broke me all the way down. So let's talk about this unapologetic guide to Black mental health. Can you tell me why you wrote the book? And I want to first say that unapologetic was what hit me, is that I needed to be more unapologetic about where I was.
And I will say, I'm excited to be here to have this conversation with this audience. You said something recently about you all being the lens of what the community is exposed to. And when a lot of hurt and pain is built into the lens, it's a lot. So thank you all for what you do for the community and what you withstand really for the community. I wrote the Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health because it was clear to me that we had lost track in a lot of ways to the reality that we have Harriet Tubman blood in our veins and Denmark Vesey blood in our veins. If you don't know who Denmark Vesey is, you all look him up. That we have a lot of strength and resilience in us, but over the generations, a lot of who we are has been kind of watered down, but the racism and the trauma hasn't. It's shifted forms. And so we've adapted and adjusted to that. You know, we were living in a racism pandemic before coronavirus, before COVID-19, but we were just kind of wading in the pool a little bit. You know, we couldn't comfortably just be who we were. We had to be careful how we talked or how we looked or how we wore our hair and what Becky said. You know, we were managing that stuff. But over the generations, and I think it started to show up in our children, who have been struggling emotionally. And so I had to write the book, one, as a reminder, you know, of who we are and how we can show up as Black people and as a community, and really kind of how we have to. I mean, we desperately have to. And that's why the book had to be unintentional, because we had to put aside all the other stuff and say, you know what, this is for us. You all know how it works. Oftentimes we have to get folded in with everybody else, but other folks don't have the reality that we exist in historically or in contemporary times. And then I had to talk to us, because there are some ways that we've learned to cope over the generations, that have helped us, but in some ways have slowed us down. And so we needed to have some honest conversations about that.
And I just want to make sure Charity is who said that about the lens, because she told me that. And
Okay.
Charity, if you could start with also talking about those triggers that we saw at work or at home, and then we'll pass it to Kristy to share some of those as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were talking yesterday, I believe it was, about how we are the filter as journalists, right? So we're everyday people who have a passion to tell people stories. And in telling the stories, we're the filter between, we're the gatekeepers. And so we process all of it in order to get it to the viewer. But there have just been times where it's just been too much. I once got in trouble for crying during fire season. The fire had come through the entire neighborhood, wiped it out. I met a man who had just survived Hurricane Katrina, and he's like, this is my second time losing everything in 3 years. And so when it came time to go live, I'm standing here with the dad and his 5 boys and his wife, who are in, barefoot, and they just had enough time to gather themselves, hop in the truck, and bounce. And as he started to talk live with me on the air, he started to cry, and I started to cry. And why? Because I was in a fire when I was a kid, and luckily we had insurance and all of that, but that was a trigger for me. At the time, I just didn't know it. But also, I am a very caring, loving person, and I've never been the person who's able to just be a journalist and not feel anything or show emotion. So you have those types of triggers, and then you have the triggers where, as a Black woman, I lived in Charlotte when the Charleston 9 happened, and I told management straight up, there's no way I'm going to that Capitol where those people are shouting coon and the N-word, and I'm going to stand there stoic. Real talk, y'all gonna see me go viral because I'll hit somebody with a mic, and I know that about myself. I'm from California. We don't play this game that we got going on here. I don't do that well. And the little hood kid in me will come out quickly. You know what I mean? And I was like, sorry, I can't do it. I can tweet, I can whatever. But at the same time, the thing that got me in trouble for crying on the air is the thing so they said, you know what, we'll send you over to talk to the families. But that was triggering too, And so that's why it's important for us to take care of ourselves and to go to therapy. Because in those moments, I realized maybe I can't do this anymore. I don't want to go talk to people on their worst day,
Yeah, and that's really why the title of what I hope will be a series is the critical importance of that self-awareness. Because you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you know where you need to be in that newsroom and what type of newsroom you need to be in. So Kristy, if you could share something as well of a trigger that you've experienced either at work or at home.
I have a really huge trigger. So in 2017, I lost my mom to a heroin overdose. From walking down the street to listening to everyday rap songs where they talk about taking these pills, drinking these opiates, it's a really bad trigger, my heart's beating right now thinking about it. I woke up this morning thinking about my mom because I can't even tell her about this moment because heroin took her from me, and that's tragic. So being in a space where I own the media company and I really curate every story that comes through, a lot of times now I really can't deal with a lot of artists, can't deal with a lot of music because it is a trigger, and I'm also responsible for the youth now because I know personally what I'm giving to the youth is poisonous. It led me down a path of, I'm not going to name any artists, but when I was younger and I was in the streets, I listened to their music for motivation. And I can't support that, because not only do we have kids out here now using these same drugs as they're selling, but we have kids overdosing at astronomical rate. My mom was one of 72,000 people to die in 2017. And the statistic is just getting more and more per year. If I'm not mistaken, we had like 82,000 in 2018. And I just stopped looking. I don't want to be a part of that anymore. What I want to do is help change it. So for me, that's a very large trigger to see all of these young kids out here on drugs. I live across the street from a Speedway. Anybody who knows anything about Speedway gas stations, they're the like the beggar's house. They just live there, and there's an ambulance there once a week to pick up somebody who's pretty much overdosed, and that's across the street from me. So it's really important to have a therapist. I talked to my therapist on Thursday and let her know, the things I'm going through. So make sure y'all check in for real.
Can I ask you, how do you cope with that? Because that's the first
That was
thing I thought
literally
of.
what was next.
Yeah.
And then I'd like Dwayne to weigh in on how, because you've worked with children. So Kristy, answer that, and then Dwayne weigh in.
How do I cope? That's an active process. I mean, look at me right now. I'm coping. It's being honest with myself about how I feel, about just being in the moment with myself. Really, that's how I cope. One of the things I learned with my first therapist was you can only control your reaction. You can only control yourself. You can't control anything else around you. So I just stop and I check in with how I feel. Like right now, my anxiety is through the roof in this moment, but I understand it's for a greater purpose because other people are going through the things that I'm going through and other people have went through it. I talked to let me be honest with y'all. This morning, I woke up to a text message from my intern telling me he wanted to commit suicide. Oh, wow. Tomorrow, I launch a campaign called Are You Okay on suicide awareness. I sent him a text message that said, Are you okay? And when I called him, he told me I just saved his life and changed his life. And those are the kind of things that sharing is important. And that's how I cope. I cope by helping other people. I take my story and I share it. Like I was talking to a young lady who's a friend of mine this morning, and she said something about like hiding a comment that was made publicly. And I said, why hide it when it's the truth? I'm sharing this story. I'm sharing this journey to encourage others to go along the way. So that's my coping strategy, is sharing and motivating others with my trauma.
And you're clearly
I'm
walking
so
in
proud
purpose.
of you.
I don't know.
Chris,
I gotta step away and get some tissue because listen. But that's purpose, sis. Like, yeah.
I'm so
Thank
proud
y'all.
of you.
I appreciate y'all.
I'm so glad I can't see Charity because I was like holding back. Dwayne, if you could weigh in.
Right, thank God I couldn't see her while I was talking. That'd have been a mess.
Oh man, yeah. So well, first and foremost, Kristy, thank you for even sharing that story. I mentioned this again, and it's a huge pillar in the kind of work that I do, which is the power of story. And for me, when we're talking about this theme of trigger, working in a high school setting with Black and brown youth, both boys and girls, I feel like I'm on the precipice in a sense of just understanding that there's such an increase of awareness and education around mental health with this new generation coming up, far more than what it's been years before, even in my generation. And I think the trigger for me is the disconnect that I see when it comes to the students wanting to seek these services out, wanting to go to therapy, wanting to talk about anxiety, depression, and all these other things, and the dismissiveness that happens sometimes with their caregivers, right? And for me, looking at the entire system, right? It's understandable that listen, when these folks were growing up, these parents are growing up, this was not in their face as much as it is now. And so it's also having the empathy to be like, listen, I get it, I understand, but you gotta listen to your kid. This is what they're telling you. Because even for myself growing up, that was a huge issue within my experience, where I always felt something wasn't right, but I was just like, well, I guess it is what it is, which then that feeling of depression, anxiety began to compound until it kind of exploded in college for me, right? So for me, that has been a huge trigger, and I've been trying to find new and innovative ways to continue to normalize the conversations around mental health and wellness and self-care, right? While also, battling, in a sense, like the perceptions that, sometimes our students and our young folks see within the media, right? Where we have these like mental health influencers and all these different things, like, spewing sometimes incorrect information, like 10 ways to cure depression, right? When we realize like there's no cure for depression, it's treatable, but there's no cure, right? So now that additional, perspective of these kids, like, well, damn, I'm not cured, because like this is what the Instagram 10 steps said, and I'm doing it and it's not working, so then it's these compounded layers of things that happen. So those are the kind of things that I continuously battle with when it comes to like my journey with mental health.
I have a very deep question for Dr. Walker, but I wanted Charity to say something that she told me that helped me with that very same point. Because I went to talk to some kids and I'm like, what can I tell them? And what Charity told me to trust myself. I had to tell them, like, no matter what adults in your life are gonna say, trust that gut feeling. So Charity, can you help us all with how you learn to trust that gut feeling that I'm not okay today?
Yeah, well, my mom would call it we call it intuition. My mom would call it the Holy Spirit, but also in getting to know yourself. Dwayne, you said something about generations before us not necessarily being okay with mental health, and it wasn't until I started to dig into who my father was as a man. Our parents are layered. And I just turned 40 and I'm like, oh my gosh, my mom was 39 when she had my baby sister. She was 33 with me, 36, 39, dealing with a man who was abusing her, trying to figure herself out. So I'm peeling apart the layers of my mom. But for me, my dad was my daddy, my hero. Now I'm learning him as a man and a husband. And I'm like, oh my gosh, as a woman, I would have had to mess him up. But when I pull back his layers, right? And just realizing that he was trying to figure it out too. He was born in the segregated South. They migrated to California and left their dad behind because he was abusive. Like there's all of these things that he brought in, while also battling like the stereotypes of being masculine and being a Black man. And he was 6'5" from the South. And I'm like, he didn't have the tools, and we have the tools. Yes. And as I'm using my tools, you said something about the 10 steps. The first thing my therapist said to me, and we need to talk with therapy. She was like, there are no steps to grief. We have taught you that there are steps. This is a roller coaster. You have to trust where you're at in the space, know what you need in the space. And if you don't know what you need, trust yourself enough to say you don't know, and trust the people around you. And I realized as I was grieving my father was that when my friends ask me how I'm doing, if I'm not okay, I need to say I'm not okay. When my colleagues ask me, because I work in a space right this minute, it's such a family. Like when I lost my dad, I live here alone, but I was not alone. And the one day my executive producer asked me if I was okay, because they could just tell I'm very expressive. Like if I'm happy, I'm happy. If I'm not, like I'm wearing it. And she was like, are you okay? And I had a dream about my dad that morning that did not come to a clean close. And I was rattled still. I don't go to hair makeup till 11:45. I was still rattled. And I said, I'm fine, because I just didn't want to talk about it. And I messed up my story, ended up having to edit there if I had just trusted myself and the people around me, trusted them with my feelings, because they know how to buffer me and they know how to take care of me if I allow them to.
Yes.
Right. That was a perfect segue to what I had to ask Dr. Walker. And I remembered it was in the first chapter of your book that was when I was looking at y'all. Because as soon as, and it's a tool, it's literally a tool that helps you figure it out. But what you said, Charity, she has written, poor communication and unresolved hurt could be addressed if there weren't so many layers of pain. It's an ugly cycle, but it's one that you can begin to chip away with. And you said something earlier about the ways we were taught to cope and how those have to change. So I'll be the one to say it. Church was a way to cope, but it doesn't work for me anymore. I had to therapy, I had to use music, and I had to find other ways that could be used together. So Dr. Walker, if you could weigh in on that, and what other ways you've seen our community cope that aren't as healthy.
Amber, there are so many things going through my mind right now. I'm going to try and make it succinct and cohesive. And I think where I start also in the book is what is synonymous with the self-awareness, and that is with the psychological fortitude. You all know about the psychological fortitude, and our ability to just kind of take stock of where we are, your assessment of your ability to manage the stuff, manage work, manage school, manage family, manage people, and live your life purpose. And so if we could all just at any moment in time, give ourselves a rating, 0 to 10, right? Just a number. 0, I can't handle none of this. 10, I'm over the moon. I've got this. And if we can, those moments where we're just like, yeah, I don't know. Okay, what's my number? I'm at a 5 right now. Then make some adjustments. The adjustments could be, I need people, I need music, I need air, or the adjustment could be, I need to take some of this stuff off my plate to kind of raise my PF or psychological fortitude a little bit. And it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
It's going to be absolutely different. And that's part of the honesty part, is that, I can't do what Charity might do. Like that's not going to work for me. Kristy can't do what Dwayne's going to do. We have to figure it out for ourselves. And I had more in my mind, but now it's just like all jumbled up. But if you want to ask me a follow-up question, then let me tackle that.
No, that was really good. I think that is a good segue to the question that I told y'all about. So we'll start with Kristy. And what you said about knowing yourself, I'll share this. I had to know what type of music I needed in the mood that I was in. So depending on like, was I at a 10 or if I'm at a 0, because I love what I call ratchet women empowerment music. And that's like your Meg Thee Stallion, your Cardi B, and all that kind of stuff. But if I'm at a 0, I need something that's gonna get my meter back up, or tea, warm drinks, like whatever I need for that moment. I do. So I even have a playlist that, and this is why it's a perfect segue to Kristy and her music, because I know that the music that you were mentioning doesn't put me in a good place if I'm already in a bad place. But if I'm in a good place, I can accept that music. And it's just about that self-awareness. So Kristy, what is something you would tell your younger self about your mental health, or how important it is, or what they can do to help?
All right. So on the 18th of this month, my next therapy session, the word of the day will be vulnerable. So I will tell my younger self to learn how to be vulnerable with my own emotions. I was a shut off person until my mom died. And I only woke up because now I had to face it, and there was no talking about it ever again. So I had to become vulnerable with me. Like I had to really have the conversations with myself because there was nobody left to have them with. My story is a little different than most people. I am an only child. All of my parents, grandparents, and everybody is deceased. So I am tackling life on my own, and being vulnerable is key to really growing into getting mental health and actually being successful with it. If you're not vulnerable with yourself, you cannot be vulnerable with your therapist, because if you cannot tell your therapist the truth about what you're experiencing, they cannot help you. They cannot walk you through it. And now on my last session on Thursday, I was the most vulnerable I've been in the last 18 months that I've been seeing the same therapist. And what it is I'm very aware of myself. I'm self-aware. And I've been searching for the answer on why I am the way I am. So to tie this into the kid thing, around 10 or 11, I remember praying to God that I would not be crazy like the people in my house. So God has a really funny sense of humor. He said, no, you won't be crazy like that. You're going to be crazy like this. And I was like, oh, okay, dude, I got you. I'm crazy like this. So my mom passed, and I just got all of these pictures back. And I was going through the pictures, and I posted one of me as like an 18-month-old crying. And I said, well, clearly somebody wasn't giving me my way. And my uncle comments on it, and he goes, no. He was like, you were crying because your mom had left you again. And I took that picture hoping she would stop leaving you. My mom was a drug addict. She did that my whole life. So what I discovered recently that even my therapist couldn't discover on her own, because I wasn't being fully transparent, was that I actually suffer from, let me see, what's the proper word here? Let me show y'all. I took notes. I went and I found it, and I took notes, and I figured it out. And it's called abandonment anxiety. I have something that I didn't even know existed. And when I said it to my therapist, like her face was shocked. Like, how did you figure that out? And what it was is I realized that I won't allow people to get close to me. I won't allow people to love me, all because I wanted love from one single person who kept walking away. So be honest with yourself, be vulnerable with yourself, and take into consideration really what you were missing when you were a child.
That is so good. I want to pass it to Charity because as soon as she talked about vulnerability, I'm like, Charity displayed her whole life in this 8-part series. So if you could weigh in on that vulnerability, how did you get to where you could be vulnerable?
About to explode all the time, on the brink of explosion all the time. And life brought me to vulnerability. So the thing is, I've always been this, cuddly, sentimental, extra affectionate person, but I often joke that I'm like, my parents are the Beauty and the Beast, because my mom, we call her Sister Janice, and she's, faith-filled, God-loving, knows how to, deliver things eloquently, snatch you together and love you at the same time. And I told y'all my daddy didn't have the tools. So he was a grizzly bear and a teddy bear, and he didn't have it, and so now you have me, their oldest, who can speak quickly and eloquently and also has a temper. And when the two come together, I can cut you and I can slice you. But how does that make me feel afterwards? And I realized that I carry a lot of the traits. Like my dad always said, my dad understood me. You were talking about being a child. I grew up in the hood, in the neighborhood they coined the deepest part of hell. And I felt like we didn't have a voice. I felt like, journalists were there to tell their story. They listened to the police. They didn't listen to us. The police didn't listen to us. A lot of times they were brutalizing us as well. And I just remember as a kid, and back to the music thing, like, the Tupacs, the E40s, those are the things that got me in my zone. Was like, I'm gonna get out of here and I'm gonna mess all of y'all up. You just watch, It's a line with Tupac song where he says something about get my weight up and pay y'all back when I'm bigger, like that. So I think it's White Man's World, I think it's called, is the song. But I'm like always on the brink of explosion. And I was like, okay, so you are strong and you take up for people and you fight for what's right. And you want to give people a voice at all costs, and you will kick in the door and you will pound for pound, like earn yours on the ground. But at the end of the day, when something would happen, again, as I'm assessing my dad's life and peeling back the layers of me, someone would come and tell him something. Because he felt passionate about protecting people, he would go in, burn down the house, and be labeled the arsonist. And a few times at work, that was happening. And so now I'm looking like the angry Black woman. And I'm like, you know what? Everybody knows you're strong. But there's strength and vulnerability too. That's not weakness. Now, also, I lost 100 pounds over the last year. And what I learned is that some of that was body armor. I told my makeup artist, they come here to be with us in the mornings now that we're at home. And I'm like, I move different in the world now. I don't have that extra padding. And now I feel more vulnerable because I'm not doom, 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 But also I've been doing the work over the last year and taking the shield off my heart, the mask off my eyes, and peeling back the layers. And I don't have to wear that. I don't have to move that way. I can. To be very clear, I can. But now I've just learned to go, also, is it worth it? Like, I don't have to stand up for every cause, stand up for every person. Like, y'all gonna have to do your own work and stand up for yourself and kick in some of your own doors. Now, I got you. If you kick in the door, I'll be right there and behind you. But, I had to take care of me first. And that is vulnerability in itself too, for me anyway.
I know you helped me realize I was grieving all over the place, just like grieving all over everyone who I interviewed that was grieving. And it was like they were allowing me to grieve with them, kind of a little bit. Some people were more receptive to it. Some were like, why are you sadder than me? Like, why are you taking on their grief? Because one story, I lost a friend she drowned. And I don't know why I accepted the story of another person who drowned in the same week. And her drowning, my friend's drowning, played out in the news. So now I was a part of making this family go through what I was going through. And it was like, I was just in this weird cycle. So for the professionals in the room, the people who have credentials, when you hear about news people doing this the wrong way, what are some tips you can give us to help us not grieve that vicarious trauma?
Mm.
What can we do? Who wants to start with that? Dwayne or Dr. Walker? Because
Dr.
I know
Walker, if
it's
you
a lot.
jump in.
I know it's a lot. Because I know you told us in the run through, like you normally tell people to turn it off, but we can't really turn it off. So what do you say? What do you think?
Yeah, there are different ways to turn it off, right? So you don't have to go all cold turkey and turn off all the news, right? Like that's not necessary. I remember for me early in the pandemic, at some point I was kind of in a fog and I didn't realize I was in a fog. And I was like, what's wrong with me? What's going on? And I was like, oh my goodness, it's the TV. And so I said, okay, we can turn it off earlier in the day. We will watch until 4 o'clock and then we'll turn it off. And I was like, it didn't work. I still kept watching the whole, 24/7 cycle. And then I said, okay, let me make an adjustment. Let me not turn the TV on until a certain time. So let's delay until noon. And the first time I tried that, I actually ended up not watching television all day. And so I know that that is a privilege for me to not have to watch the news. I know that you all have to have some exposure, but you can still make a decision to dial back. And someone might say, well, I really do have to watch it all the time. And I encourage those folks to ask the so what question. I'm always telling people, just say, so what? So what if you don't watch it 24/7? Well, then I won't know everything that's going on. So what if you don't know everything that's going on? Well, that'll look suspicious to, my producers and everybody else. Well, so what if it looks suspicious to them?
Yeah.
And then sometimes the conversation just kind of like, yeah, because you have to find the balance between knowing everything, which you all know, you don't have to know everything. You just need to know some, and maintaining your psychological fortitude. Because if you go too far down the emotional rabbit hole, you can't do the work anyway. And so I do suggest, taking the step back, being very intentional about taking the step back, and then building up all the positives. I understand that the pandemic has taken us away from being able to, connect in person, because that's the stuff that builds us up. That's the stuff that fortifies us when bad things happen. We've got to get some good music in there. We got to get some Tupac. We got to get it all in there on the front end so that when tough things happen, we can manage it better. Maybe there are some folks who are still watching their church virtually, but if the pastor is saying, just pray about it, just praying about it can't be the end of the story. Pray for,
especially in our community, they love
especially
it.
In our community.
That's not therapy.
pray for
Oh
a
my
good
God.
Lord.
I was waiting on somebody to say that.
God created therapists too, just like he created medical doctors. We cannot take it all to the altar. We're going to start at the altar and then we're going to find a therapist to work through it.
Absolutely. So find the things that work, whatever they may be. And we can't do what we've always been doing, especially now in the pandemic. Whatever we were doing that worked, 5 years ago, it might not work now. And sometimes we just have to take a big old step back and say, what am I doing that's working? What am I doing that's not working? And start there.
I do want to remind people that you can ask questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, or we're going to keep talking. So Dwayne.
And I think it's a perfect segue from what Dr. Walker was saying, because the things that we were doing to take care of ourselves pre-pandemic, it was probably not going to work in this point in time, right? And there's an exercise that I love to do with my students, with the folks that I meet, with the adults that I meet with in therapy, which is unpacking, we call the 4 dimensions of wellness. And forgive me if some folks know about it already, but it's your spiritual wellness, your emotional wellness, your physical wellness, and your mental wellness, right? And it's just like, it's a quick journaling exercise where you literally just break up a piece of paper in 4 parts, and you just kind of just sit and think about, like, what is it that I need, in my physical wellness, like quadrant, right? And, it begins to take us away from this idea of this, like, self-care only looks like get my nails done, do my hair, getting a haircut, shape, all that type of stuff. It's beyond that, right? And it also helps us when we are under stress, right? Because when we're under stress, it's hard for us to think clearly, So if I know that I have at least this kind of this ritual, or I have this resource that I have created that is specifically authentic to me and what I need, it's easier to pinpoint, you know what, I've been lacking on my physical like well-being today. So let me see on this list what I can do to take care of myself. Right. And I've realized, you know, for myself, because it's something that I practice as well, that it has curbed my, you know, my TV watching, because I was just glued, like MSNBC, CNN all day, locked on. I'm like, to the point where I'm just like, let me see what my friends are talking about today. Like, they became my friends. Right. So for me, it was like, all right, how can I begin to take a step back? How can I really focus on myself and what it is that I need to kind of fulfill and pour back into myself? Because the worst thing that you can do is continue to like move and be running on E. Right? Because if that cup is poured out, there's nothing that you can pour back into somebody else. So that's kind of like my tidbit in my recommendation when it comes to just a quick exercise to do. And you don't need a therapist per se, though it's good when you want to do it with a therapist, right? Because you can really dig a bit deeper. But something for you just to unpack and explore on your own. And then when you are under stress, which one do I not pay attention to the most? You know, so that's kind of my tidbit there.
Dwayne, my therapist.
Uh-oh.
My therapist, you know, like in that, I don't know, maybe 6-month mark of my dad passing, I go see her once a week, and now virtually. But she was like, okay, so let's break this down. Why do you think because I was like, I'm just in this pit and I can't get out. And I'm logical. So I'm like going through my checklist, blah, 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 blah. Again, this is a heart issue. You can't logic your way out of it. She told me that too. And I was like, sure. But she was like, so you like to go boxing? Have you been boxing? You told me that you connect with God in worship, in like corporate worship. Have you been to church lately? Again, this was like 2019. And I'm like, no. She's like, what have you been eating and drinking? And I was like, lots of wine. But her point was, and she brought it back around and she said, you know, this is one big cycle and one thing affects the other. And so those things are what help bring in the good feelings into your body. The exercise, the eating well, the sleeping well. And if you're not exercising and eating well, you're not going to sleep well. If you drink wine before bed, you're not going to sleep. So all of this is your spiral. But because you're spiraling, you don't want to do all of the healthy things that you're supposed to be doing. And I was like, oh, man. I didn't think about it, but it was like, duh.
Literally,
that's why y'all are important.
You really like, and your therapist can ask questions in a way that's not as judgmental as you ask yourself. Because I know I'm a hard judge of myself, but she asks it in grace. And I went to therapy just yesterday and I was like, man, I missed you. Like, I don't know why I kept rescheduling it and acting like I didn't need it, because they ask in a way that is, I don't even want to say loving, because she doesn't coddle me. She just, she guides me through this process. So also there's some questions that are popping up in the chat. If you could copy them into the Q&A box, that would be easier for me to see, but I will get to the ones that are in the chat. I did want everyone, nope, we're gonna go ahead and go to the questions because I know we can get to talking. So I guess anyone can answer this one. How can your family support you if you're implementing therapy, if you're not, like, you know, like, how can they support you in any way through your mental health journey? And anyone can answer. Who wants? I know my mom asked this, and my mom just being there, you know, like, not judging me. If I say I want to go to therapy, don't say why. Say it's great, you know, like, don't question. If I say I want to only eat vegetables one day out of the week, don't say, no, you need some carbs. No, literally, plants are a source of fuel. So don't question my healthy choices as they're, just because they're strange to you, they're good choices. So I know that's for me.
What's the way you ask the question too? Because sometimes it can be antagonistic versus like asking to gain more information. So I tell my support system, like, ask me questions, because I done pulled it apart myself. So as you're pulling it apart, it helps me. But I will say that my mom has always been a very big advocate of therapy. Even like when my parents separated, we were 9, she sent us, and I didn't like that therapist. To this day, she's like, she was great. I didn't like her. I wouldn't like her as an adult. 9-year-old me didn't like her. 39-year-old me didn't like her and 40-year-old don't like her. Like, I just didn't like her. And that's a thing. But we're very open to therapy and the process of therapy and what it brings to it. I have several members of my family who have, been in therapy. Several of my friends are therapists. And I think generationally, we are just here to peel back the trauma. So I've been blessed in that manner. But I would say to people who don't have that support, like, I have colleagues who reach out to me now and say, hey, I'm going to therapy because I heard you say on Saturday. Because I say it openly. What you doing this Saturday? Therapy, boxing, and then therapy. And people go, you talk about that so openly. And I'm like, because if I rip the Band-Aid off, then you can't, like, I own it, so you got to own it. Next.
And I love that. Oh, I love that so much. There was a question about dealing with microaggressions on the job. I know we probably all have felt them. I know for me, it was confidently saying, no, that's not how this is going to go. Like, just polite. I like to sprinkle in politeness, but confident and stern. I know I have a boss that sometimes doesn't think I need to lead the newscast, or will question my pitches a lot more than they question other people's pitches. And I had to say, have I ever given you a reason to question my pitch? And then just wait, like, if you ask a question, give them a chance to answer it and ask it politely, but give them a chance, because it's not rhetorical. I need to know, have I ever given you a reason not to trust me? Is it my skin color? Like, that's what's in my head, but like, no, so
that's coded for sure.
Tip. That's coded for sure. But anyone else, how do you deal with microaggressions?
I would say, another part of my job at the school is I do a lot of diversity and inclusion work there. So addressing microaggressions is something that always comes up, when it comes to the savior complex that a lot of our like white teachers enter the space with, where, we coming into these inner city schools and we know what the kids need, and this perspective. And I think, Amber, you hit the nail on the head when it comes to just probing and leading with inquiry, right? Because the more you begin to probe and the more you begin to ask these questions, the more, they begin to question, like, oh, like, I kind of walked into this a little bit. And, and that is also a learning moment for them as well, where when it comes to, sometimes it might be something that they're not even aware of subconsciously that they're asking, right? So for me, I think I just want to continue to elevate your perspective and what you've done, which is to continue to probe. Like, like, for example, it's like, I'm just so excited, this senior is graduating at an 8th grade reading level. It's just so nice. Well, why do you think that's good? You think that's okay for him to, what reading level did you graduate with? Like, so it's asking these questions, and then for them, they're just like, okay, like, okay, maybe this wasn't like, okay, right? So it's that kind of perception that I love to push, in a sense, when it comes to the work that I kind of do when it comes to addressing microaggressions.
I don't deal with them anymore. I used to, but I've dealt with enough of them. So, like, the whole, like, being nasty about it, like, you ask me something that is silly, I'm gonna respond, but not in the, like, oh, I have to be so super polite anymore. I'm professional. But now, instead of being like, because back in the day, I'd probably giggle first, and then now I say, why would you ask me that? And I'm going to have the conversation, but I also want you to sit in what you just asked me. Because if you're not going to ask anybody else that, or question anybody else that, if you didn't question so-and-so who missed slot 3 days in a row and didn't tell the complete story, don't ask me. Don't say that to me. But I've grown into that and come into a position of power in that space. And so, I mean, I encourage you to do it Amber's way until you reach a space where you have the leverage to not. But, and again, I'm so blessed to work in the space that I work in now, because they're not ridiculous, but you run into it, and with neighbors and all of it. So.
No, but that's so true. Like, and I don't hide from the fact that I have a very nervous laugh. I'm trying to control it, I promise. But I struggle with eye contact sometimes. I struggle with having those conversations. And until I get strong as Charity, but trust me, it's coming.
Oh no, my therapist got me though. That's why.
That's what I'm saying.
The Oakland one.
Is there. And It's so funny because my boss, like someone asked me, where did your confidence come from? And I really said my braids because I do believe that when they said I could get braids, it did something. It was like a light switch. But therapy too. But it was like braids therapy. Therapy. Anyway, okay. Sorry, y'all. Another question that I struggle with also. Mental health days. Dr. Walker, if you could weigh in on, do you have to tell them that it's a mental health day? And how, because the question was framed in making sure that they don't treat you like something's wrong with you if you say you need a mental health day. So, like, it's just, I don't know, because I struggle with that. Like, I thought I was needing some special assistance, and it's like, no, I'm tired. So, how do y'all suggest doing that?
It's interesting. I might be far removed from this because if I need a day, then I just say no and take this day.
Something is wrong with me.
It requires no explanation. I mean, think about if you had a health concern that you didn't want everybody to know about, then you would just say like, I need this time off and away. So we don't always have to tell our business. And one of the things that I wonder about is just, what is the fear behind us not doing the things that we need to do for ourselves? So if you have a fear about saying, or, I need a day, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like we need to ask these questions for ourselves when we have trepidation about doing what we need to do. So say as an example, you're like, you know what? I'm overloaded. Yesterday's reporting was too much and I can't do this tomorrow. What is the worst thing that can happen if you just call whoever you need to call and say, I can't come in tomorrow? What's the worst? And then have that real honest conversation for yourself. And if you can't have the conversation, then try an experiment. This is one of the things that I love to talk to, therapists that I supervise to talk to their clients and patients about is an experiment. The good thing about an experiment is you're doing something new and you don't know what the outcome is going to be, but you've got to do the experiment to see if it's going to work out. Maybe it'll go your way, maybe it won't, but you have to collect the data. So try something new. And this is, again, about doing things that we haven't done before because we are living in some very different kinds of times. And we just got to try some things differently. Do an experiment. Yep. Just say, I'm not coming in tomorrow. I cannot, but I'll see you all on Friday. Bye-bye.
I tried that and it works. I don't feel well because I really feel like mental wellness is a thing. If I'm not okay, if I'm sitting in bed crying and I cannot move, I feel like that's enough. Or if I have a headache from crying, I feel like that's enough. If my eyes are puffy from crying and I got to be on TV and you want me to look nice, that's it. Like
it's absolutely
our industry is toxic.
That's one thing.
It's true.
No, one thing everybody needs to realize is seriously, they do not need to know, and it's none of their business. Take a day off. These jobs treat you as you're disposable. I treat jobs as they are disposable. I will call you on Monday and tell you I will see you on Thursday. If you want to fire me, I will be at a new place on Monday. That's fine. Don't do it to yourself. You need to understand that if you die tomorrow, they will have somebody in your place next week. Stop playing around with these jobs. If they don't care about you, stop caring about them and claiming ownership over your life because they don't own you.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree.
That part, that unapologetic, because that is so true. I said that and somebody was like, no, that's not. I said, if I died, y'all might do a story on me. Please use a nice picture. But 3 days later, or not even 2 days later, there would be a job posting. So, and that's another thing. We don't talk about the journalists who have committed suicide because news doesn't cover suicide. So their story wasn't even a thing. And it's like, if I took my own life, they would be sad for 2 seconds. So I think they would much rather me take a day, go to therapy, release it all on a piece of paper. I literally journaled, and y'all might laugh at me. I journaled for 45 minutes straight to DaBaby's album, Kirk. And it's because he wrote that out of grief for his dad, and it helped me grieve. So when I hear that album, I'm reminded of that helped me heal a little bit because he grieved so publicly about his dad. So yeah. So we'll end
Our
it
industry is
here.
just toxic though, and nobody ever we
And that's
shine
so
a light on
true.
everybody else. Like that is our job, to shine a light and tell the story.
Yeah.
But like there's so much racism and biases and prejudice like running rampant in our industry. You know, we talk about mental health and we do the mental health stories, but we don't want to clean up within, you know. And to their point, it's not anybody else's business. But once you have the meltdown, then everybody's going, well, what could we have done to help you? Listen when I told you in the first place.
And
I will
just
say
to piggyback.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I would just say, just to piggyback as well, off of this idea of mental health days is a lot of organizations and companies are now beginning to transition into like allowing that or putting that into contracts when it comes to the time. So like if you are looking for a job or you are interviewing, I would ask like, so what is your policy around mental health days? If we are really pushing the narrative of normalizing mental health conversations, you know, all around us, it's just like putting it out there and making them look like the crazy ones for not having it in their policy. Like, so you don't, so how do your employees take care of themselves? And what are you applying? What are you providing for them, you know? And then and that's kind of how we were able to push a mental health day in our organization, because it was necessary, it was needed.
So I will say Meredith did start doing that. And I'm glad, it's so divine that you even said that, because that was what I was going to say. They started pushing take your days. And I'm like, yes, the next step is putting in mental health in the policy that is, you know, because I still have coworkers who feel like that's not okay. And that you can't just say I'm not well. But I'm like, maybe if you wrote it out, mental health, maybe it might help. It really might help. So 10 minutes.
Well, we feel disposable.
We do. And we feel that. And you got to value your people so that they feel like, and that was something they said in another country, that when you had unlimited PTO, it made them feel worth the work that they were doing. So, but we won't get into that because the US is behind on that. So there's one last question that I would like everyone to answer. How do you cope with your anxiety that's attached to the pandemic? And this is from someone in the audience. How do you cope with the anxiety that's attached to the pandemic when you have people depending on you? So if Dr. Rheeda Walker could start, and then we'll go in some type of order.
Well, again, thank you for this conversation. You know, for me, I have to be as intentional as anybody else, because I do have a lot of people who are calling on me, and oftentimes people that I don't know. And so that's why I have to, you know, throughout the day, throughout the weekend, check in and say like, okay, how am I doing the day? You know, if I have 6 or lower, then I'm not looking at anything. I'm not on the phone. I'm looking at mindless TV. I might go sit, and we talk about journaling. I don't always say journaling, because for some people they hear journaling, it's like, ooh, it's not that fancy. You know, just sometimes I'll grab a piece of paper and a pen and just write down words, you know, like just the words and the thoughts that come to my mind. Because what happens is, you know, when we get in our heads, it's hard for us to problem solve and be strategic about coming up with solutions. So I do all those things, and I have my playlist, and some of it's ratchet and some of it's gospel, you know, and I'm real about that. You know, you just got to figure out what makes sense. And that's what I do for me. And I think, you know, Kristy talked about helping other people. And yes, I get a lot of joy from being able to help other people, because I feel like I'm using my purpose. I'm doing the thing that I was put here to do. That's why the book was important to me. I've actually brought the book to life in a course. So on my course, folks can find out about, you know, being more of your authentic self. Because for me, being in academia, you all talk about, you know, these different industries. Academia is an interesting place. And so I've had to kind of navigate who I am and how I show up. And I make decisions every day. Okay, am I doing this today for this purpose? Or am I doing this today for this purpose? And again, always being intentional. Some days I have to say, okay, I'm going to be Dr. Rheeda Walker. And other days I'm like, y'all better stop.
Code switch on them.
So that's what I do. That's how I figure these things out.
Yeah. And I want everyone to answer this, but also throw in some way that people can reach out to you, or like anything you have going on. So Kristy, I know you talked about you talked about what you're about to launch. How do you cope with your anxiety, and then how can people, I guess, use your product or your project to cope?
So, some of my coping with my anxiety is actually I'm writing a book called Surviving Their Addiction. My mom's
Mm.
addiction clearly was not mine, but it took over my life literally until the
Mhm.
day she died. And well, we're almost 4 years later, and here I still am surviving her addiction. So, writing is one of my ways. I recently became a certified meditation teacher, and meditation is also one of the ways that I take the time to check in with myself. A lot of people tell you in meditation to clear your mind. I actually allow myself to go with my thoughts and see where they take me. And
Mm.
that way I'm actually conscious of what I'm feeling. So if you'll need me, you can reach out to me at www.kristyfsteele.com. That's really a service based site, but you can get me there for anything. Or you can go to www.saveour.family. It's a dot family, not a dot com, and you can find me on social media at my name, Kristy F. Steele, on Twitter and IG. I will reach out to you and make time for you. If you have a real emergency, I call me 2 o'clock in the morning. I will answer the phone. I'm that person. I don't care if I get a
Mhm.
100 phone calls. Um, Really, I'm gonna give you all a special announcement. It wasn't gonna go public until midnight tonight, but me and my artist FaZe Jackson are dropping a song. His song is called Prayers Up. On this
Mm.
song, he actually speaks to his suicidal thoughts. But to go along with the release of this video, Save Our Families is now letting out a text hotline. You'll be able to text us for resources. Yeah, you see Amber's face. She didn't even know. So this is really something that
That's awesome.
I've been up all night making sure the graphics are ready and everything is ready to go. So you'll be able to text the hotline. You can text any word, but right now the keyword is resources. We will send you links to resources. I want to make it clear this is not an emergency line. Please contact 911 or one of the lines dedicated for that. But we will connect you to different resources. We will help you in any way possible. And I also have the Hood to Healer podcast. So anybody who wants to check that out, we've had a licensed therapist on there. We've had a mental health coach on there discussing trauma and different things.
Mm.
And we are actually following up with a panel ourselves on the 27th, which will also touch on like suicide awareness and mental health and trying to remove the stigma around reaching out to get help. So that's where you can find me.
That is amazing. I'm over here crying. Okay,
Yeah.
we only have a couple minutes. So Dwayne and then Charity, and I'm gonna compile all of this together, like Dr. Rita's
Yes,
course,
yes.
her book. I'm gonna put it somewhere, and then I'll ask it every day to send it out, and then I'll post it on social media too. So, Dwayne, how can people
uh,
find you?
yeah, folks can find, I'm pretty simple. Folks can find me on social media. You can look up my name, Dwayne James, or I like to go, well, on my social media handle is Wayne's, WAYNES _ ambition. It goes off of the song by Wale, Ambition, because that was like my soundtrack that took me through a lot of tough times. So that's like my ode. So you can find me there. And there was one question quickly on the in the chat that and I think the person mentioned, what is a quote that you all use to kind of keep you through? And I would love to just close with that on my end, which is a quote by Sean Heffling, which says, I'm no less of a man because I fear. I'm no less of a man because of mental health struggles. I'm no less of a man because I only get to decide what a man means to me. So that's kind of a quote that I like to kind of hold near and dear to me, and like and especially for some of our males that might be here, because when it comes to stigma and identity and mental health and just really speaking and being vulnerable, that's something that we still consistently battle and struggle with. So that's my OTY.
Yes, I have so many quotes, so I'm not even gonna do this. Charity,
So
and
off
then
the
I'll
top,
close after that.
one of the most recent quotes for over the last year or so, 2 years anyway, my girlfriend Amber said to me one night, I was on the phone just like bawling because it had been days of me just crying and grieving my dad. And she said, there's a quote that says that grief is just love with nowhere to go. And that it hit me. And I have several scriptures that are like my, day-to-day anthems, all things work together for the good, he who began a good work. But that quote, it just spoke to me. And so what I started doing is, in the vein of coping, was doing a love is journal, because I was like, I am so loved and nothing can take the place of the love that I lost. My heart is broken. But when I would open my journal and do love is, it's cuddling with my dog, it's my nieces, it's girl talk, it's brunch, it's all these little things that I was not aware of because I was so thick and deep in the grief. And so, I mean, it could be a thankfulness, a gratitude, you know, and you mentioned everybody doesn't like to journal. That's true. It's just listing it out so that I'm well aware of the places I'm loved when I feel like I'm losing it because the love of my life is gone, you know? But that said, I also realized that as a single woman with no children, that when the pandemic hit, you know, I was able to shut down and to stop down and to enjoy the silence and solitude and to actually get in deep and do the work and ask myself the tough questions. I had just had surgery, so I couldn't eat it away. I couldn't drink it away. I had to actually just sit literally in silence and solitude because I live by myself and we in the middle of coronavirus and I'm post-op. So once my sister left, it was just me. And I decided to journal that one night. Like, I am here. It is just me. It is quiet. And I need to just shut it all off. And that is another space where Girl, We Need to Talk evolved. But it was birthed out of my pain. And I am a firm believer that there's purpose in pain. Not that we need to continue to experience pain just to have purpose, but I asked God what was the purpose in this pain, and Girl, We Need to Talk was born out of that. And so it is on YouTube now. And again, we talk about everything from self-care and, you know, the grieving process and therapy to, you know, what it looked like for me and my sisters, what it looks like for other women who have lost their dads or lost their moms, you know, the battles that we fight in our bodies and that type of thing. But it's really just a space where we can just come together and love on each other, talk about the hard topics, and grow through our grief. So yeah, you can check that out. I'm Miss Charity Bailey on all of my social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Miss Charity Bailey. So holla at me. And if you, you know, want to talk about anything, I message back too. I respond.
You just dropped a bar, so I'm gonna just repeat that one. Grow through your grief. And that is, I have so many. All things work together is a good one because I truly believe all things will work together for your good. And Lecrae's Restoration album and his All Things Work Together album and a song called Sweet Dreams by Tripley. Like, I found things that I could truly go to. Like, even after this heavy conversation, I'm gonna go have to listen to something that'll fill me back up because this was heavy. It was good heavy, but it was heavy. So I hope this is our NABJ's most watched video on YouTube. So I'm gonna put all of the resources people listed when it's up on their YouTube. Put them there, and because that'll be a good place that people can go to find everything everyone listed. Because that grief series by Charity really rocked me and realized and then this book, it's just find your tools, and even after this heavy talk, go do something that makes you happy. Like, I might go make me a cup of tea because I like warm drinks. You know, like, find your thing that makes you happy because this is good heavy, but it's still heavy. So with that, I just want to thank you all. Thank NABJ, because I wouldn't have had a way to bring all these people together. And I don't know how many people are watching, but I wouldn't have had a way to have this topic without NABJ. I probably wouldn't have got my first job without NABJ, but we won't talk about that too. So I just thank you. And the panelists, oh my God, y'all make me so happy today. I'm not gonna, okay, I'll start crying. I thank y'all.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you for
Thank you for putting this together.
Okay, oh my God.
No, thank you. We're the sum of our experiences. So
we are. Yeah. My God, we are. So thank y'all. And I hope y'all have a good day. And if you need any of us, like we said, reach out, use the tools we've listed. I promise I will respond to you today. I don't have to work, so I'm gonna do that. If you reach out, just please reach out to someone if you're struggling. So with that, thank you all.